my mum used to come into my room to escape my dad and cry, and then open up to me as her best friend, even at the age of 10, about his affairs and about things that were going on, about things he said, of course, being drunk and angry. So that automatically made me, I think, the defender of my mum.
So Jazz became the defender of your mum. Who did you become?
Almost it felt as if I had to grow up very quickly. We had to kind of parent the arguments that were happening. So if anything, we kind of became the parents at a very young age.
Do you think it robbed you of your childhood in some way?
I'd say so, yeah. I don't remember too much of it, mainly perhaps because I've tried to shut it out.
Imagine carrying the weight of expectations, silent struggles, and the pressure to always have it together. The Dad Project is a space for open, honest conversations about men's mental health. Raw, real, and long overdue. In season 2, we go deeper, sharing powerful stories and fresh perspectives from those who've lived it and those who help others through it. Filmed at the Old Court in Windsor, this season is about breaking stigmas, redefining strength, and starting conversations that matter. I'm your host, Naroop Juti. Let's talk. Gov, Jazz, thank you so much for coming onto the Dad Project podcast. I was introduced to you by a friend. We had a Zoom call and I heard your story, and it's remarkable. Before we get into that, as a brother and sister, what was it like growing up with each other? And Gov, I'll start with you.
So for me, terrible, actually. No, if I'm honest with you, Jas is probably going to be one of my best friends, to be honest, throughout a large majority of my life. She's been a confidant, and you know, a lot of things that we went through together, which I'm sure we're going to get to throughout the podcast. First of all, thank you for having us as well, because it's the first time that I'm doing anything like this myself in terms of presenting to anyone or anything like that. I'm sure Jas is well experienced in that field. But yeah, she's been my best friend for a large majority of my life. And even now, I would consider her to be one of my best friends.
And I saw that between you actually, as we were setting up, how Jazz, you were just fixing his clothes. And it was actually really sweet because I don't always see that. I've got a brother and I have got cousin sisters who, in Indian culture, we treat them as our sisters, right? Mm-hmm. But to see your relationship was really sweet and endearing. What was Gov like growing up?
Yeah, I mean, again, one of my best friends now. But when we were growing up, I mean, like any siblings, right? You fight, you argue. He's my older brother, so he was quite protective. I was obviously the Indian sister that wanted to push the boundaries and break the rules a little bit. So yeah, I mean, look, it was great. We were best friends. It's very close in age, so he's only a year and a half older than me. And now it means we have similar friendship groups. We get on really well. He kind of hangs out with my husband without me there, which I don't like too much. But yeah, no, it was fun growing up together. But there are also moments where we were, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but we were separated. So there's periods of times where I didn't see him for, months and months on end as well.
So your childhood, I guess, was a little bit different to other people's childhood because your parents had a difficult relationship, didn't they? And from what I understand, when some people were shielded from what happens with the parents, in your own words, their relationship was too transparent to you. You guys saw too much. And this is what makes this conversation really interesting is, as two adults now, how does a parent's dynamic affect the children? And obviously that's so vivid to you at the time that you can still remember it, but now as adults, it's probably had a lasting effect on you, which is why we're talking. Mm. What happened with your parents? And as the conversation flows, how did it affect each of you individually as a man and as a woman?
A lot to unpack, but I'll try and keep it kind of short and sweet. So My parents, for that generation especially, were one of the blessed couples that had a love marriage. So it wasn't arranged. It's very typical in our culture to have an arranged marriage. It wasn't arranged. They got together when mum was 19, dad was 23. And initially they couldn't have kids for a very long time. So I think it was 10 or 11 years before they were blessed with the gift child of Gov. So they went traveling and they did a lot together as a couple. Maybe as a result of that, they had quite I wouldn't call it toxic looking at it. It was a very explosive relationship, right? So intense love, but also intense arguments, which I'm sure a lot of people listening to this probably have been through themselves. Dad was then unfaithful multiple number of times, and also went through a lot of financial difficulties that mum got wrapped into as well. And then they separated when I was 17, you were 19. But they had problems. When I say, it was a very transparent relationship, I can remember problems from the age of 10, 8, 10. Obviously, Gulf's a year and a half older, so 2 years older, so he would have been 10, 12. But that was continuous up until we were about 17. I was 17, 18.
What were these, when you say problems, what were they?
we became knowledgeable about the unfaithful relationships very early on. Arguments. Dad had a problem with alcohol. So pretty much we're talking school nights, we're talking the weddings, you come home and everyone's had a bit to drink. School nights, a lot of it was being witness to very heated arguments that were, in theory, behind closed doors, i.e. not in front of us, but we could hear everything. My bedroom was right next to my mum and dad, so that's where I probably heard more of what was said and what was happening than Gov, who was a little bit further away from it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say I was shielded from a large majority of it for a portion of my life until sort of 16, 17, where I could really understand what was going on. And unfortunately, just sort of bear the brunt on a lot of what was going on at home. For me, it kind of looked like when I was 16, 17, a lot of drinking, which I think in our culture happens quite a lot, especially in the Asian culture where, generation after generation, we kind of see like a lot of men resort to alcohol. And therefore the dynamic of the family automatically changes to a slightly more toxic environment. So that's from what I've seen and witnessed. And at the time that the separation sort of occurred was when I was going to uni. Again, it was as if I had kind of naturally fallen into the path of being shielded because I was away. And just, unfortunately had to, again, bear the brunt.
So let's start from when you were really young and you used to hear these arguments. Can you remember, if you close your eyes, can you remember being that young girl, that young boy, and just hearing your parents shout? And how did that make you feel? Did in any way you think it was because of you? Because I know a lot of times children feel like they are the cause of the arguments. Sometimes they can be used as tools against each other. The parents do that. Yeah. How did that make you feel at that time?
So there was definitely an element of feeling like I could solve some of this. I don't know if I felt at the time that I was to blame. I can only speak from my perspective, not Gov's, but or we were the cause of it. But I definitely felt, even at a young age, responsible for standing up for my mum and in some instances even interfering and shouting back to my dad. And because my room was so close to theirs, it would literally be a case of me opening their door and, shouting and arguing and trying to stop that conversation from happening. And I remember distinctly, all these memories are now flooding back to me, but my mum used to come into my room to escape my dad and cry and then open up to me as her best friend, even at the age of 10, about his affairs and about things that were going on, about things he said, of course, being drunk and angry. So that automatically made me, I think, the defender of my mum, or what I thought I was, the defender of my mum. So from the get-go, I had a very kind of rocky relationship with my father. I didn't finish the kind of narrative, but my dad actually had a heart attack when he was around 60. So he actually moved back in with my mum, me and Gov. And at that point, I'm sure we'll cover some of this later, but he started, quote unquote, telling the truth about what really happened. He was very much in denial for all these years, and that kind of reset him, and he wanted a good relationship with everyone. So he started kind of being honest about what happened throughout our years of childhood. And the last three, he's passed away now, but the last 3 or 4 years of his life were the best years we've had as a family. To be clear, he didn't move back with my mum from a romantic relationship. It was purely he was ill. We didn't want him to be out, quote unquote, on the streets or not being looked after. And because of their love marriage, they were also best friends. So she took him back as a friend. And then they enjoyed barbecues in the garden, just them two, towards the late. It's such a weird thing to think about and conceive, right? Because it's a very odd story in that sense.
There's so much you've said that I could ask you questions on, but I want to try to go through it chronologically. Otherwise, I'll just jump back and forth. But yeah, we will touch on some of those points. So Jazz became the defender of your mum. Who did you become?
I think for me, it was interfering with the arguments that had happened and occurred. So almost it felt as if I had to grow up very quickly. And it kind of felt at certain stages throughout my life, even at a young age, where we had to kind of parent the arguments that were happening. And I feel like a lot of the time, as Jas sort of alluded to in terms of like interfering with the general like verbal noise levels, we had to kind of break that up and had to adjust accordingly. So if anything, we kind of became the parents it at a very young age. And I think a lot of that has like imprinted onto me to try and push myself, both in my like career, but relationships. But as we go forward, I think that's a lot of pressure that it put on me as a young child. Do
you think it robbed you of your childhood in some way?
I'd say so, yeah. I'd say so, because I don't remember too much of it, mainly perhaps because I've tried to shut it out. But yeah, I think it definitely has impacted me from that level.
And have you ever tried to address it? Have you ever gone to therapy to really, because a lot of the time when there's stuff, like you said, you can't remember it, it's because your mind actually blocks it out.
Sure. So I myself have been open enough to try CBT, but I think that's more like a routine type of therapy where I probably need a bit more in-depth sort of counselling, if I'm honest. So I'm still trying to work on myself. I don't think therapy is a bad thing. And again, like in the Asian culture, it's kind of looked down upon because of our parents and the generations before. But I just think the mind is also a muscle that needs to be exercised, right? And if you don't do that enough, especially in today's society, I don't think you're going to strengthen it. So yeah, to your point, I am currently seeking it as well.
Amazing. What's really interesting for me about that point is why your dad was doing these things. And the reason I say that is even today, there are men who are facing challenges who will turn to drugs, alcohol, gambling, a form of distraction to escape the reality of their lives. And clearly your dad was drinking, he was having affairs. From what it sounded like, and you told me, they had an interesting marriage in terms of there was a lot of love, a lot of arguments. Your mum seemed to be more balanced. Did you ever have a conversation with your dad and say, Dad, why are you doing these things? Like, because there was a reason. And maybe you found that out later on in life. But at that time, I know you guys were young, but did anyone try to chat to him? Did any of the family members try to come in and intervene and say, look, you're doing stuff which is destroying a beautiful family. What is going on?
Yeah, so that's actually something that we have. We've got a very open relationship with all our family members. That we've asked our cousins. So we're the youngest siblings or cousins in our family. All of our cousins are a lot older. So we asked, how come your parents never stepped in, or how come? And to cut a long story short, they didn't. No one was really there for Dad to question or to challenge or to even just ask, are you okay? Because that type of behavior is not, I think we used to see it as normal in terms of generations. A lot of dads drink, a lot of them do these types of things. But now we look back and say that behavior is not normal. And it was only until, like you said, later in life, I sat down with my dad and asked, what was that about? And it transpired that his dad actually married or had kids with two sisters. So what we would call dadi, so my dad's mum fell pregnant, and her sister came to look after, this is in Kenya, so my family's from Kenya. Sister came to look after her and the kids and help out, and he ended up having kids with the sister as well at the same time. So I've done therapy myself as well, and it's only until that conversation came to light, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense to your behavior, Dad. Have you ever really thought about how this has impacted you as a child witnessing this? So yeah, we could have a whole podcast on just that. So there was it gave me a lot better understanding sitting with my dad and having those truthful conversations, and really difficult for him to have those conversations. But it made so much sense to me as to why he was the way he was.
So your granddad had kids with his wife's sister, and obviously your father had witnessed this, and then in some part of his mind thought, this is what men do, right? And we always talk about how generationally behavior and trauma can be passed down. And as men, we look to our dads as role models, and as women, you look to your mum and your dad, we do. And that must have been difficult for your dad to understand, what has my dad done? Why has he done this to mum? But as he's growing up, it was just okay, maybe this is what men do. When you found that out, how does that make you feel?
I think for me, it almost didn't make sense, because in today's society, it just doesn't happen. We kind of grew up with a lot of the cousins from that side anyway. And I think that just talking to them and just having that conversation about whenever it was brought up, it was kind of hush-hush. So it was as if it never kind of existed. But there was always something in the back of my mind that was sort of telling me that this is wrong, right? And it shouldn't happen. But again, I don't think anyone was brave enough to kind of challenge what had already happened. So kind of upsetting in a way, but also I knew it was wrong, and I knew it was something that I needed to stay clear from.
Do you think that's affected you and your relationships that you have now?
I wouldn't say now, I would say before. I was, even up until like late 20s, I've always had sort of commitment issues that I needed to work on myself. And a lot of that has been impacted obviously from a very young age, thinking and acting like a sponge almost to all the information that was around me, sort of normalizing it to a certain degree. But as I said, now looking back on it, I was thinking that it can't be normal. It's something that doesn't happen, especially in today's society.
How did you break free from that pattern? Was it just recognizing that, okay, I've got issues with commitment? Maybe it stemmed from what I saw as a young man, as a child.
If I'm honest, again, it was a conversation that actually happened with my mum. So she basically sat me down and said, look, this is exactly how I was treated, and then, didn't want to necessarily have me treat other females and women like that as well. And I think that was the most impact that I had in terms of as far as the conversation goes, to change my ways and to try and stay on the narrow path, straight and narrow path.
What's really heartbreaking about this story is knowing that your mum knew about what your dad was doing. And why I think this conversation is so important is because there may be people who are listening to this who are in similar situations, who might be being unfaithful, not knowing how it affects their partner. How did your mum process it? How was she able? Because I know eventually, and we'll get onto it, you guys moved out. How did she stay in the house, in that relationship, knowing that my husband's, he might be out with someone else. I don't know where he is. Don't know what he's doing. Did you have conversations like that with her?
Yeah. So, and again, these conversations were when I was quite young. You know, we were talking 12-year-old Jas sitting, having these chats with my mum. It was, and I think for a lot of women in general, I think it's, we've got kids. Let's make it stable. Let's not rock the boat too much. I think as well at that time, it wasn't, you know, women nowadays are very quick to exit the door just because it's easier and it's seen as empowerment and, you know, all these types of things. Back then it wasn't, right? It was you stay at home and you stay with your husband, you look after your kids and you do all those kind of things. I don't think she has processed it truthfully. Dad would always be, even like now, her best friend, and obviously later in life became her best friend again. She was heartbroken. She was in pieces, but very much the type of woman that just puts a brave face on, and everything is how the world perceives outside in, not I feel this inside and I'm going to project that outwardly. So she just cracked on. And we're not talking about one unfaithful relationship as well. It was, I mean, you're talking double figures. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Do you think she made the right decision to put you guys first?
Now that I have a daughter, putting us first, in my perspective, would be to leave, not to stay. And that goes vice versa, right? Whether the man's in the wrong or the woman's in the wrong. Because I think it's more unhealthy for children to be in that environment and learn that things might be okay when they're not.
And Gov, I'll ask you, do you agree with that? Do you wish that maybe they had separated so your mum could have had a bit more peace? You guys weren't exposed to it, because that probably still happens now, where people stay together for the kids. And I actually agree with you that when the trust is broken, unless you really put a lot of work in it, and there are plenty of cases where they do manage to come back together, but I always question the long-term impact on the children.
So I think either from a male's perspective or a female's perspective, if you've allowed yourself to be cheated on and stay in the relationship, I think, again, this is a very personal thing. At the point of cheating, I think it's done. And I don't think that you can rebuild that trust. I guess you can, you know, go to couples therapy and try and work on the relationship as a whole. But for me, once you cheat, it's kind of done. And that's just the perspective that I've had just growing up all of my life. So to Jas's point, I think it would have been healthier at the point of finding out for my mum to leave. It's difficult for me to say as an Asian boy, because obviously the whole mentality of growing up is to keep that foundation of a family. But at the same time, it's healthier, I believe, for one to move up.
Why do you think, when you say as an Asian boy, why do Asian families do that? Is it because they're more worried about what people might think? Or is it because they think the kids need it? Because there's many cultures out there where, you know what, you cheated, see you later, I'm done. But why are we so worried about what other people think?
I think it's a reputation thing, as well as perhaps a confidence thing in Asian men, in terms of needing support to flourish a child. I feel like a lot of, this is just again my perspective, but I feel like a lot of Asian men feel like they need support, whereas the woman probably feels more stronger and has the sense of independence to be able to bring up a child herself. I don't think that enough Asian men have the support in terms of their families. They're always often looked at as that's the person in the wrong, just through society. And I think that it comes down to both the reputation for themselves, but also within the Asian culture, the extended families and so forth, I believe may actually see them as the fault when it might not even be perhaps the reason.
So funny you should say that. This podcast actually started to try to break the stigma that single fathers of color aren't able to raise a child by themselves. Because I agree with you. People look at Asian men or men of color and think, he can't do it himself. But there's countless examples of men who thrive raising a child by themselves because they want to be good dads. Mm-hmm. So I hope that this generation, we can show people that if you're a single dad and you're Indian or you're black or whatever, you can handle it. Like, we're going to get it done one way or another. And I think that's a big difference, because I know my dad said to me countless times, Narup, I couldn't do what you do, right? And I know that because he never changed my nappy once, right? But I'd like to believe that we can break that stigma. But you're right, in that time, they probably couldn't, right? I don't want to talk on your dad's behalf, but what I find is really interesting is, and this is something that I'm not able to relate to, but I would love to know if you guys have had any knowledge on it now as adults, is when someone has so much to lose, why would they risk it for countless affairs? What do you think? And you've had conversations with your dad when he's older. Why did he risk it?
I can give you two answers, my perspective and his answer.
Okay.
Look, there's two sides to every story, right? There's a truth, there's one person's opinion, there's another. He did feel a lot of the time that he wasn't getting what he needed in the relationship as well. And that's why people typically are unfaithful, right?
What was that? What did he need?
Support. Again, his perspective, but it was support. It was emotional support. It was potentially as well attention. Mum is a very good mother, right? So it was a combination of maybe where they had such a fun relationship at the beginning because they didn't have kids for 10 years. Did that dwindle down? Did that kind of get lost in then you being able to have a child because you've waited for 10 years for it and that kind of stuff? My perspective of why did he keep doing it, I think he liked an element of chase, of thrill. And I mean, it's a similar perspective to my dad, but I think it was less around mum giving him support, because I've seen mum's perspective as well, right? So yeah, I think he liked the chase. He liked living on the edge a little bit. I think that's a great quality about my dad. Not that he was being unfaithful, but just that he liked risk. He liked, he was a challenger. Like, I see it as a positive light, not in the actions that he did, but as a personality trait. I think you've got that trait a little bit as well. Like you like to go on the edge, go just onto the edge a little bit.
Yeah, I would say like there's those elements of extremism, as we sort of spoke about in terms of like relationships and going to the extreme on every aspect, right? So I think that a lot of it was to do what his perspective would be the risk element and the sense of like just enjoying himself. And maybe he got robbed of that at a young age as well, because it was imprinted onto him. I can't justify any of his actions, to be honest, because I see men now in a different way. So I always said to myself, like, he was an amazing father, but in terms of respecting him as a man, as a husband, I lost that at quite an early age, if I'm honest. But again, like in terms of fatherhood, he has taught me a lot. And as you said before, like every son looks up to their dad as a hero. And he gave me the best advice in terms of career, relationships, to a certain degree. He was able to do that in the later stages of his life. To your point about risking what he lost and everything, I feel like he did enter a stage of depression in his late life, because once he'd lost everything, it was then that it kind of hit him where he needed to become more self-aware. And I wish that had happened at an earlier stage, because it would have changed a lot of the dynamic of the relationship, both with myself and him, but also with Jas and him as well.
If you could speak to a man who is feeling those emotions, and I agree with you what you said, Jas, probably felt lack of support, emotional, physical attention, wanted to have, let's be honest, some more sex maybe, right? Feeling isolated. Now the kids are getting more attention than me What about me? We went travel around the world. It was fun. There was highs and lows. You get the dopamine of the highs and, you know, the fights. Again, it releases dopamine too. There's a thrill to both of them, right? If there's a man who's going through that, now feeling that isolation, that loneliness, on the verge of thinking, do you know what, it's just the lady at the office, you know, me and her flirt a bit, maybe I can get a bit of thrills there. Individually, what would you guys say to that man to, one, stop him from doing that, and two, give him some advice as to how he could overcome those feelings?
I'll keep it short and sweet. Have a chat with your partner. Give her or him an opportunity to give you that without you going to seek elsewhere. I've approached my relationships from the get-go with brutal honesty to the point where if I'm not happy on a Sunday, I'm be like, Charlie, I'm not happy. Can we do something? I'm bored. And literally I have to be that vocal about it because I'm so frightened that if I bottle it all in, that could happen, right? That could happen, and you don't know what I feel. And my husband's a very lad, keeps it all in, never will talk about his emotions. Like, I'm talking emotional depth of a fork. But I've really had to encourage him to not see a conversation as an emotional thing. It's matter of fact. What you're saying is, it might not be factual what you're saying to me, but what you feel is a fact. It's a fact that you feel this way. So you don't always have to come with crying and emotion. So we just have chats where it's like, this is how I feel. And it's like as brutal and it's just simple as that. So just, please just have the conversation. It can only go one of two ways. You know, like it's going to go bad or it's going to go good. If it goes bad, you're going to do what you're going to do anyway. If it goes good though, you could save a marriage, be healthy, show your kids that, you know, this is okay. It's okay for you to come to the table and say, I'm not happy with this. Like, can we have a peaceful, you know, cordial conversation about it?
What would you say, Gov?
I would say I definitely have a conversation, and communication is number one in any relationship, above all else, I feel, even more than love and things like that, right? So I think communication, if you've got that transparency between two people, and it is everything. But aside from that, I would also say, what are you actually, is it worth the risk? You know, that 15 minutes of fun or whatever it may be, is it worth jeopardizing everything that you've worked for, your kids, or even if you don't have kids, the whole sanctity of marriage or relationship in itself? What are you actually risking? And again, for my old man, it was little too late, when he realized that what he'd lost was so much more than everything that he perceived as gain. And again, like, you've got to have that drive and that personality to chase the chase. Every man needs it to a certain degree, but shift the energy, like shift it onto something that will promote your life as opposed to destroy it.
That's so interesting you say that. They need to chase. But what do they have to chase, right? So a couple of points you guys made are really, really interesting. One, communication. Why do people find it so hard to have an open conversation with a partner and say, this is how I feel, right? This is what I need, and this is what I feel I'm not getting. Obviously, when you just have a child, a man does need to understand he's not going to get everything that he had before. Physically, in the very early stages, it's just not going to happen, right? So fatherhood is about sacrifice. It's about doing what's best for the family. Part of that is realizing I can't have sex whenever I want it now because my wife has just created this amazing child. She needs to heal emotionally and physically and build the strength to raise this child. So I've, as a man, got to realize that my needs have got to be put to the side for a bit. And I think it's actually quite selfish when a man doesn't do that, thinking I've now created this being and that child's needs comes first. And sex is a massive driver for people, it really is. But what I think can overcome that, and what you're talking about as a chase, is chase something else in life.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time I find men, they're not happy in their personal life for what they're doing. Sex is an easy way to get a little thrill. But if that man was building a business, training for a marathon, doing something, helping, volunteering, the thing he's chasing in life is still there, but it's not another female. It's a dream, it's a passion, right? And that's what I feel is lost a lot of time. When you really dig deep and have conversations with these men, they're just not happy.
Yeah.
What is it that you really want to do? I don't know. What's your dream? When I was young, I wanted to be a footballer. I'm like, join the club. There's a billion other people like you. But what makes you really unique? And these, I think, are really interesting conversations to have with men, because it's so easy to go out and get turned on when you see an attractive woman somewhere and think, yeah, I'm gonna chase that. But I think that's the easy way. And when you really go deep, and when you're trying to heal and build self-esteem and build confidence, you've got to slay a dragon. You've got to chase the thing that's hardest for you. Yeah. Even if you don't kill the dragon, but you wound it and you see progress, you feel strength. Oh, look what I've done. Right?
It's that sense of achievement, isn't it?
Sense of achievement. So, and in no way do I mean any disrespect to your father. I'm just talking about men in general.
Yeah.
Because I've got experience with friends of mine and people that I know who have been through situations. And when you really strip it all back, and this is why I find it so interesting talking to men when they're going through stuff, is when you strip it back, it's the same thing. You know? Eventually you, Jazz, and your mum moved out of the house. Mm-hmm. How old were you when that happened?
16, 17, yeah.
And what did that feel like? Because there's countless families out there which are separating where, you know, the daughter will move out with the mum or the dad, but there's a separation. Mm-hmm. 4 becomes 2 separate households, 2 and 2. How did you feel, and how did your guys' relationship impact from that?
So I encouraged mum to leave, obviously because I knew so much had gone on from an early age. But the day it happened was the worst day of my life. Even though I was supporting her, behind her, you know, all those kind of things. Seeing my dad in that state, that I've never seen him ever.
What was that state?
Crying, begging, pleading. Just not a man I've ever seen before. And my dad, before that point, was strong in my perspective, was strong, put together, would never shed a tear, always jovial, always laughing, always joking. And to see him in that state, even I questioned, like, oh my God, is this the right decision? What are we doing? And when I was 16, 17, I hated my dad because I knew too much. And yeah, that was tough. And it was tough. I mean, look, it was tough for my mum as well, not taking that away from her, to have to leave and see him like that. The way it was done was probably not the right way in hindsight. But yeah, it was hard. And I think our relationship from that point was, me and mum moved out and he was at uni. So I became estranged from my dad for so many years, but I, in a way, became estranged from him as well, because when he returned, he lived with my dad.
And again, to see my dad in that form as a son, like prior to that, always looking up to him, not for the relationship side of things, but just looking up to him as any son would to a dad, kind of changed me. It kind of made me have a different relationship with him because I was trying to toughen him up. And in hindsight, kind of, I didn't ever want to think that I was being disrespectful to him. But in a way, I kind of was, because I was trying to like bring that jovial sort of bravado back out of him, and he didn't have it anymore.
And how did that make you feel? Like, we always talk about this idea of your dad's your hero. Now you've tried to give him strength. Really, he's meant to be your strength.
I think looking back on it, I felt like I was disrespecting him because I was so aggressive with him and trying to like oomph him up and give him that spine. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was, feeding into the strength that he needed to have. But I was probably making things worse looking back on it, because if you're already in a depressed state, and you've lost so much. Again, this is probably where I need my therapy, right? But it was probably the wrong thing to do, but I thought at the time it was the best thing to do because it made me feel like I was being that support for him. But I guess I was a bit too aggressive with it.
What could you have done differently? You say aggressive, not being as aggressive, but what does that mean?
Not necessarily. So I think what I would have probably looked back and done differently is the tone that I came across with him would have been more mannerful and less sort of, come on, just pick yourself up kind of thing. And again, it was the relationship boundaries that had kind of been broken down. And I felt like I was on a level where it was just friends as opposed to father-son relationship. I just come back from uni. I kind of got mixed up in drugs at the time. So I was doing like quite a lot of weed and whatnot. And that changed me as a person, since obviously dropped. But I think that I viewed him as kind of like less of a man. And I feel like I needed to be that strength for him to push him up, but I did it in the wrong way. So looking back on it, I would have changed the tone that I had with him at a lot of times.
You said you changed your view on him and he was your strength, but he was your strength, but he no longer was that man that you needed him to be. So who was the strength for you in life then? You needed someone. You were at uni, but we all know when you're at uni, you think you're a man, but you're really not. You're still, it's 18, it's nothing.
I think for me, there was a few of my cousins that had successful relationships. And I think later on in life, if I'm honest, Jas's partner, who I got quite close to as well, was sort of like a role model to me in terms of how to conduct yourself as a man. And I think that maybe strengthened the bond or reconnected the bond that we had to a certain degree, if that's okay to say. So at the time, I would say majority of the people that were around me, which were my cousins who were more athletic, more successful in that sense. And I had good friends around me at the time as well. But in terms of a role model as such, I would probably say that Jas's partner was quite, we was up there.
You said as a man. What does it mean to you, having had the experiences that you had in your life now? What does it mean to be a man?
To be able to take care and provide for your family, to be able to be stable and not necessarily chase, be content and not necessarily chase the bravado that I was once feeling that I needed to give to my dad. Because you, within yourself, have to be comfortable with who you are and be aware of who you are. And be someone to look up to for your kids. Like, be someone who is a positive role model in every sense. I don't measure success in money, finance. I think that stuff kind of comes and goes. Thankfully, I believe the wealth that we have is shared in our health and the people around us.
So do you believe you are that version of the man that you described?
Nowhere near. I think, as I said, I think it's important to keep learning, keep pushing. And again, that whole mentality of chase the chase, I've now directed it in a way that I want it to be. So having looked at other people chasing, I'm trying to get all of the pillars to stack up straight in my life so that I can be that person to whoever I bring into this world, right? So I would say that keep improving, keep striving for more, but also be aware of yourself and, be grateful for what you have. But no, to answer your question in short, I think I need to keep improving.
You've used the word chase quite a lot through this conversation, actually. And then when I look back at your dad, chasing, granddad, probably chasing.
Yeah.
Right? So this theme of chasing and chasing seems to be quite prevalent.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned content. How are you going from chasing to being content? What's the mind shift?
Gratitude is the word that I would say probably best describes that, because you've got to, for me, you've got to be grateful for what you have and thank, God or whoever the energy that you believe in is. But from where I am, it's God. And you've got to be grateful and content with what you have. When I mention chase, I don't mean necessarily females or women. I mean a shift of changing that chasing energy to bettering your life so that you're able to help and provide for others.
Yeah, and chasing can be alcohol, it could be gambling. It's a high, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's a feeling. You're chasing a feeling. So Jazz, I'd love to understand how you view being a man, right? What it means to be a man from a female perspective. And you're our first female guest on the podcast. So I'd love to know, when you think of a good man, what is a good man? What does it take to be a good man?
I think a good man is self-aware. I don't think anyone is without demons, whether they've been through a tiny bit of trauma, a huge amount of trauma. Trauma's trauma. So I think a good man is self-aware. He knows, I like this thing, and that's okay. I think a good man avoids denial. And that comes from being self-aware. And I think a good man, whilst it might be difficult, is an empath, because if I could shape the perfect man's personality, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's things like, have fun, humor, all the things you want to write as a woman when you're looking for this perfect man. But I'm talking in a depth, the soul. It's self-aware, avoid denial, and try as hard as you can to be an empath, because I always try and look at any argument or disagreement with, but where are they coming from? And I think if more men did that, it would be easier for them to have those conversations and sit with their partners and be like, I'm not happy. Because then the partner can be like, I'm not happy, and really try and understand and come to some sort of mutual understanding.
That's interesting, because you talked about how you said your partner isn't that emotionally open. And I think every man in the world knows that their female partner wants them to be more emotionally open. Mm-hmm. Tell me what a man should understand when their partner says, be more emotionally open. Describe it, because as men,
I can do this.
As men, we're like, what? Like, I'm feeling sad? Or how do you want a man to be?
So I don't know if all women want this, but for me, I'm not an emotionally open person. So I also have the emotional capacity of a fork, and Gov will tell you this, because he comes to me with a lot of problems. And I'm just like, come on, let's talk about this properly. I just think emotionally open does not mean tell me you're sad. It just means tell me in real, short, factual sentences, what is it you're feeling and how can I help?
Is that the same as I'm feeling sad?
It could be.
Okay.
It could be. But it also could be I'm feeling happy. Like, it doesn't always have to, I very early on with my relationship with my husband now, I was like, tell me why. You never tell me how you feel. You never tell me if you're sad. And he's like, Jazz, that's because I'm happy. Like, back off. Like, you want me to be sad. I'm not sad. And that, I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize someone could just be content and happy. But I needed to hear it. I needed you to just tell me that you're okay. And I'm like, okay. Because I think, I personally, I think a connection between man and woman, or man and like relationship wise, it's not just sexual.
Of course.
And I think to know that you're okay or not okay is just as strong connection to know that we're having great sex in bed. Like, I don't think that you can progress and have a long-term health. This comes with friendships, with everything, right? With me and my mum now, like, I need to know you're okay. And if you're not, let's just have a really factual, non-emotionally tanked conversation about it.
Do you know what I find actually makes life a lot easier for men? Is if you just ask them why they feel a certain way, right? So sometimes women will say, just tell me how you feel, and a man doesn't know how to respond. But if a man says something to a woman and the woman says, how do you expect me to feel when you say that? Or what do you actually mean when you say that? Mm-hmm. When you approach them with a different question or make it a bit more specific, they can probably open up a bit more. When it's too general, they don't know what direction you want them to go in. But when you can really, especially in arguments, if someone said something and you say, what are you trying to make me feel by saying that? Mm. Then they start to look internally as to why they're saying the thing in the first place. But a lot of times in conversations, the other person just wants to be heard and the other person wants to be heard, and they're at each other. But I think when you have a good in-depth conversation, it means you can be good listeners and you can start to understand each other and ask questions that will make you reflect on why you said that thing in the first place. And too many times, and I heard this on a podcast, people attack, not because they want to hurt the other person, because they're frustrated the other person doesn't understand how they're feeling. And I've noticed this. And I try to have this approach now. And it actually really works. It actually really works.
People want to be heard, right?
Yeah.
It's everyone wants to be heard. And I think when you aren't heard is when you keep talking about the same point over and over and over again.
I think I'm probably on the opposite end, where I'm so emotionally open that I can tell a stranger about my life and probably start crying, and they're like, I just met you. But that's my personality, right? Do you agree, Gov, that men should be more emotionally open? Are you emotionally open in your relationships?
So I think I am emotionally open and quite transparent, but I've grown up around, Jas, who I mentioned was one of my best friends, right? I think it boils down to one thing. I think as leaders, as men, we want to provide for our family, which I think is a great thing to do. We're often thinking about the solution. So in any conversation, we're finding out, what can I do to help, or what can I do to solve this problem or this issue that you have? And I think sometimes from a women's perspective, it's just about listening. It's not necessarily providing the solution there and then. I would say it's more about understanding, empathizing to your point, and sometimes not even giving a solution. Sometimes they're just looking to vent or to have a discussion, just so that they're aware that you can understand it. And again, it's just down to that point. I do agree with it, but I just think that as men, we need to stop thinking necessarily about the solution there and then. That comes at a later stage. But just to understand what your partner feels or how they process things is sometimes enough.
Have you guys had a conversation between each other about how you view your childhood? Because from an early conversation I had with you guys on Zoom, I know that, Gov, you were shielded from certain stuff because your parents were worried how it would affect you as a boy. But yeah, you were told everything. So as a woman, you would suspect her, take everything in. She's a girl, she'll understand. They're more emotional. Boys are a bit more delicate. We don't want him to start have a negative effect on your life. So you were basically exposed to, I guess, maybe different worlds in some ways, right? Then you went to uni, you're doing your thing. You said you're smoking weed. That's probably a way to mask your pain, right? Have you guys had a conversation between each other and said, how has this affected us now as adults? Like, how have we been formed, and how has it led to who we are now?
So we were forced to have that conversation probably twice in our life. Once was before this podcast, because obviously you want to have that conversation and just check in and see what's going to be said. But also, I got really ill, like 4 months off of work. I have diabetes and lupus and a blood clotting condition, so I've got the whole package. And when my dad passed away, it all flared up. And whilst I was off work, I did microdosing to try and repair what Gov mentioned about muscle being a mind. It also impacts, I believe it impacts stuff that happens internally. And part of that was us having a conversation about, like, it was my homework to have a conversation with those nearest to me and really try and flush this out. And that was probably the first time, and I'm 33, 35, that we've ever had that conversation.
34.
You're going to be 35.
And what was the outcome of that conversation?
For me, it was to see her perspective on us growing up. And I kind of felt, not empathy, but sympathy for you a lot of the time, because I didn't realize, how much she'd gone through and how much she'd heard. And we kind of I kind of experienced a top level from it in the sense of outside in. But for Jas, it was as if she was almost like privy to everything that was going on in the relationship. And I felt like I needed to be her support more. I needed to be there to support her more then. And obviously I wasn't. And I kind of felt like I lost that sense of protection as an older brother, because I would have been there, or I should have been there, was often going through my mind.
Do you think you're making that up now? That's why you guys are so close.
I'd like to think so. Although, to be fair, I think she protects me more than anything else. But honestly, I think that we have a very open and transparent relationship, and we have built that through a lot of conversations that have happened and a lot of events that have happened that we've perceived differently. But to be able to understand things again from her perspective has helped me. I can empathize with it. I'll never fully understand it because I wasn't there. But I feel like because your siblings are probably, as you've grown up, you would have experienced life in a very similar way. And therefore, when she mentions that time or this time, I was there, but I wasn't quite there, but I still understand it. And yeah, it has brought us a lot closer.
I have a different perspective.
Interesting.
As always. I actually think that you have been there for me. And I think you knock yourself down a peg or two when you think about these things. Just to give a tiny bit of context to this, what I'm about to say is Dad passed away 4 months before my wedding. And he said a comment to me that I will never forget him saying. He said, "I never thought I'd attend your wedding as your father." And honestly, like, I'm not an emotional person. That broke me. Like, when I went home and I digested that, it was just like, wow. And he hasn't realized, but through my life, he has stepped in as my father a lot of the times. My father role a lot of the times. And I think he doesn't recognize that he's done that as much as he has. So yeah.
Is that the first time you're hearing that?
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
Weird. I mean, she's mentioned like she's thanked me for the speech at the wedding, walking her up the aisle and all that stuff. And I think that back then it kind of impacted me a lot. But I just see the things in a different perspective to her, I guess, in that sense. Maybe I do knock it down.
I admire you both. I can feel your energy. I'm a big energy person. I can feel the connectedness between you. And it's really beautiful to see. And you're naturally going to step into that position. And you did the right thing. What I find very brave and very respectful is that you welcomed your dad back into the house. It's so easy as a son to decide by your mum, protect her, as a daughter to say, "Dad, you literally hurt mum so much and us. And now when you're ill," I know it was a joint decision to take him in. You had every right to say, you made your bed. Mm. Did you forgive him when he came back?
Not immediately, no. And it took a while for us to work on that relationship and build that, again, level of trust between son and father. I can only speak on myself. I don't think I forgave him at all, to be honest, until quite close to when he passed. So that's a big question. One that I probably would say no, if I'm honest.
Jazz?
I did. I used to meet my dad for a beer in the pub a lot. And he used to speak to me a lot about his mistakes, and that element of transparency didn't just happen with the bad stuff. It happened in my eyes with the good stuff. What I mean by that is being honest, telling me, I did mess up. I did do this. I did do that. And admitting things that hurt, and owning it, just owning it. Nothing, not asking for an apology from him or him saying sorry. It was just, listen, these things happened. I did do it. If you want to ask me questions about it, let's have that chat. And we did. So I forgave him, I think. Yeah, I think I did forgive him.
Why didn't you go to the pub, Gov?
I was there. Sorry, no, I did do things with him and take him out as and when I could. But again, it was more of a friendly kind of drink as opposed to in-depth conversations that I think he had with Jazz. By that point in his life, again, going through depression, I was very much the, you need to do this, you need to do that. And maybe he didn't really like to hang out with me too much, purely because I was slightly aggressive in the tone that I was coming across. And I think it kind of weighed on me to not forgive him because, again, I'd lost that respect for him as a man, but not necessarily as a father. He's a great father, but just I wish he'd been a better husband and a man.
That's interesting. I think as fathers get older and their children become adults, they have to constantly focus on developing themselves too. And I'm now going to speak on a son and father relationship, because you raise your son, a lot of the time in your image, you want him to see the world as you see it. Mm-hmm. But as he grows older, he's seeing the world through his own experiences at university, at school, his hobbies, his work. A young man will grow into a man himself and then realize his father is no longer the person that he respects, because they've got two different views of the world. The father's view might be outdated and old, a bit old-fashioned. Yeah. There might be some caste stereotypes, or there might be a little bit prejudiced, or there might be a little bit sexist, whatever it is. But the son's now living in this modern world where there's equality and they don't care about race and religion and anyone can marry who they want to marry. But that father is not doing the work to understand, 1 minute, I can't project my feelings of the past on my present day son because that time is gone. And a lot of time father-son's relationships break down because a father is not doing the work for the son. And that's a massive issue. And I've seen it. And I know of cases like that. That's why I think as a father at any stage, if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, you got to keep working on yourself, especially for your children, because the children are growing up in a different world than you grew up.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you weren't able to forgive. And I can understand that. Because now you're holding him in your image. I would never have done that, Dad. I would never have done what you did. So I can't forgive you because you're going against everything that I believe in. All my values, you've crossed them all. So I can't. And that's a very deep thing. And it's very brave of you to admit that. Whereas Jazz, you were able to spend time with him and you saw it from a different side. Mm-hmm. So the question I have for you both is, there are plenty of fathers out there whose relationship with their children is broken down. The kids could be teenagers, young adults in their 30s. What could that man do to reconnect with their children? What would it take from the viewpoint of a son and from a daughter? It doesn't have to be that the relationship ended because of affairs. It could just be they weren't there, they weren't present, they became addicted to drugs, alcohol, whatever. But how does that man rebuild it? Because there's so many men who are desperate to reconnect with their kids. And I was at an event recently where the man said, I've just had a divorce, but my children have taken my ex's side and I'm desperate to reconnect. I know what advice I gave. What would you guys say?
So from a son's perspective, or from a man's perspective now, I would say, similarly to the whole point of not finding a solution and not being the overbearing parent to live through your children, understand them. listen to them, and once, I'm not saying that they should dictate the relationship either, that's not what I'm saying, but just so that you can understand and listen to your children, to guide them in the right way, but not necessarily live through them. I feel like quite often as men, we think we're right and we think we've got the solution. But what I would say is listen to your partner, listen to your children, and then be able to navigate that relationship in a way you think is positive.
So you think put aside how you view the world and listen to what they need?
I would say not necessarily put aside completely, but through your own experiences, help teach your children and help teach your your partner, because you're always learning from your partner as well. But as leaders in terms of the relationship dynamic, I would say navigate that to the best of your ability, but listen and hear your partner, listen and hear your children, to allow for all the relationships to flourish.
Jazz?
I think you hit on it when you talk about understanding the world your kids come from is different to the world you have come from, and that can be even if you're a dad in your 30s now. It's crazy to think, but it can. I can only talk from my own perspective. My dad became my best friend. Like, when I tell you my best friend in the last 4 years I had with him, I'd call him driving home being like, oh, my friend, she said this, she's being such a bitch. And he's like, maybe you're being the bitch. And like, genuinely, like, he became my best friend. And it's really horrible for me to admit this, but he had no choice but to let me get away with things. And I knew I could push that boundary because mum and dad weren't together. And I think that happens quite a lot with kids from separated families, because your kids know, sorry kids out there, but your kids know, I can get away with this because you want to speak to me, you want to be my friend, you want my time, attention and love. And initially, it's probably the worst advice in the world, but I'm going to say it. Initially, as a father, I think you do need to just kind of swallow that pill a little bit, and allow your kids to open up to you so that you can form a relationship later on where you can give the advice without them feeling like, oh, you're just being my dad, you're not listening to me, you're not empathizing. It goes back to being able to you can only be an empath if you're listening. So I think initially, you have to kind of just be that best friend that they want you to be, and let them tell you things. My dad, I'd never forget it, my dad always said, if I ever find out something that you haven't told me, I'll be angry. But if you tell me something, no matter how bad it is, I will never be angry. And he said this to me when I was 10. So going back to Confront, he was a great father, just a bad husband. And that's very much how I want to bring my daughter up now. I'm like, just tell me the truth. I will never get angry. You could, shoot heroin. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but just tell me, because I know I can help you then. If I find that out though, there's going to be a problem. So just try and, it's hard. It's a hard balance, because you are a parent. You're not a friend. But if you want to try and reconnect, especially with kids that are, slightly more vocal about their opinions now than we've ever been, I think you need to try and marry their wavelength before you can start saying, maybe think about the world in this way.
That makes me happy, because I said the same thing to my daughter. She's 9.5. And I said, I want to be the best dad for you. Just be open to me. Like, I know I'm the father. I know there's some things you want to tell your mum. And when you're with your mum, you can. But when you're with me, I want to be there for you too. Just don't hide it from me. Whatever it is, tell me. And you're right. They might push the buttons a bit, but you want to be a safe space for them and listen to them and let them know that they're not going to get judged. So I think there's a lot of truth in what you said. Is there anything about your guys' journey that you would like to share with the audience? Anything that you've learned, anything that you feel we haven't covered that you think listeners would really get great value from that I haven't asked you?
I think this is probably from a perspective of both male and female, but when you're the one that's been hurt in a relationship, it's really easy to be consumed by that pain and by that hurt. But going back to your point about, a dad has to be unselfish when they bring a child into this world and, you know, expect less connection and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I think the same goes for when you've been hurt. You have a child to think about first and foremost. And it's really easy to sit there and moan and bitch about your partner to also your children, or anyone that will listen, or, you know, become consumed by that pain. But just, if you can stop, think, reflect, how is this going to impact this child? Even though you think it's not. Our parents didn't realize we were hearing a lot of the things we were hearing. So yeah, just think about that. Just even if it's just 5 seconds, pause after you listen to this and think, are my actions impacting my child in a negative way?
Why do you think some parents don't realize that themselves?
Just because the pain's too much to, you know, if you get cheated on, if you're in an abusive relationship, physical or mental, all you think about is the pain from that, especially if you're able to escape that. I don't think people realize when they escape the pain, they actually think about the pain more than when they're in the pain. I don't know, and that sounds weird to conceive, and then it all becomes talking about that pain and talking about how you escaped and validating what you've done and being proud of what you've done, of course, because you've escaped, you've gotten out of it. But what you're then doing to your child, that's listening to all of these stories and listening to all of this stuff, and does that impact their relationships in 20 years' time? So it's hard.
One point I'd like to add is that it seems like your dad coming back was a form of closure for you guys. Like if he hadn't, you might be two different people sitting right here. You probably needed that.
Yeah.
Right? And so would you recommend now to the children who have got issues with the parents, make up? Because you don't want to leave it till you find out they've got cancer and a week left to then try to squeeze in 10 years of a relationship into 1 week, because it will never work.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to the children now?
Absolutely. Like, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. I think even though my dad came back in a physical form, i.e. moved back in, you don't need for that to happen for you to be able to build a relationship back with your parents. And there's nothing worse than regret. There's nothing worse. We can say this from a place of him not being here anymore. You're better off trying to have that conversation and open that door and accepting that wasn't the right decision if it doesn't work out, than not trying and not knowing whether it was the right decision or not.
And from my perspective, yeah, personally, you know, I didn't get to build on that relationship as much as Jas did. So that's the thing that I would have probably changed and done differently, in terms of being more active with my dad to take him out, to get to know what went through his head at certain times. So I think it should have been really encouraged more from my perspective. And to anyone listening, in terms of children or even young adults, fix that relationship before it's late or before it's too late. So fix that relationship, work on the relationship with yourself, and work on the relationship that you have with your parents.
Well, you guys have both been really brave to come on here and share your stories. I know a lot of people just wouldn't do it, but I sense you want to help people through this. It's not like you've got a vendetta to go and say anything about your dad. It's like, look, we've been through quite a, crazy journey, but look, we're good, and let's hope we can help other people. So I really respect that. And I know your dad's proud of who you two are now. And I feel a sense of peace from both of you. I don't feel like there's stuff that you really you haven't released. There's a calm energy about you both. So that brings me peace in as well, because I know that there's hope for families who have gone through difficult times, that if they do forgive, reconnect, put the time in, things can repair over time. Not immediately, but it can happen. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and to hear your stories.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers.